Thank you for joining us for another episode of Spatial Web AI Podcast. Today, I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Arsalan Abtahi, founder and executive chair of Symphony. Arsalan, thank you for coming on our show today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so now you present an interesting combination of skills. You're a medical doctor and also technologist, social workers, so smart city experts, sustainable development. You seem uniquely equipped to tackle some of our greatest human challenges that we face as we navigate the near future. So please tell us a little bit about yourself, some of your background, and kind of what drives you in the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Look, first of all, it's not about me. I always talk about a collective intelligence. So unless all of us come together, there is no way we can tackle any problem. So I'm just a node in the system, and I try to do everything I can to, as always, we say, leave the world better than we found it, right? So like you said, yeah, my background, by training, I'm a medical doctor, and it actually does a lot of the things that I do actually do relate to one another, because I feel like, when we talk about a human being, this is a very comprehensive, complex system that actually resembles a city, if you think about it. So we have, over 30 trillion cells, which are like mini factories all working together to keep us alive. Energy systems, we have water systems, we have our kidney, we have our liver, we have all these highways we call blood vessels that, take energy and nutrients all over the body. We have our nervous system, which is kind of takes over the governance. So as you can see, again, this is like a full-fledged comprehensive city that we were talking about, right?
Yeah.
So in medical school, as I was learning more and more about how our physiology works, how our anatomy works, I could see kind of the microcosm of the universe, right? So when we zoom in, we see this complex system, but when we zoom out, we also see the same thing. So the holonic structures that we always talk about. So that's why when I graduated from medical school, I always had this perspective of kind of zooming out and, really looking at our collective intelligence. And, and again, on a cellular level, when we zoom in to our body we look at ourselves under a microscope, we see these islands of cells are, connected together via an extracellular matrix and all, kind of collaborating together. There's a very high level of interoperability between different parts of our body and how our homeostasis is maintained. So I was always thinking that, when we as human beings come together, we're kind of like those cells, right? Yeah. So we create this bigger body, and not just us, everything that's around us in our environment is part of that collective body. And the problem is, as human beings, we have kind of isolated ourselves from nature. So we live within an artificial system that doesn't have that level of automation, doesn't have that level of interoperability. And that's why we are kind of struggling in a lot of ways. But I believe that technology can bridge that gap, right? So it can, again, bring us together in a harmonious way. So that, like we talk about biomimicry a lot, so that we can kind of do the same thing that our body does in our cities. So that's kind of the analogy, behind inclusive, sustainable, smart cities. So again, the organization Symphony is on a mission to enable this multicultural, programmable ecosystems we refer to as inclusive, sustainable, smart cities. And we're also working with the standard bodies such as IEEE to hopefully create an overarching standard for all the different components that need to come together to, have a new global standard for future urban design and especially smart city development. And the main reason why we call it symphony is because we believe that all those fragmented systems that need to come together, like different instruments that need to come together to create a symphony, are already there. All what we need to do is to kind of orchestrate them and again create a symphony of different voices, different technologies. And it's not just about technology. We have technology, we have science, policy, urban planning, architecture, everything pretty much coming together.
Yeah. So, it's fascinating to me because when you talk about the different components that need to come together for interoperability, it's quite a challenge. What do you see as maybe the greatest challenges that are surrounding, the building of smart cities? And, what does it mean to build an inclusive, sustainable smart city?
Well, so first of all, I think a lot of the challenges are not technical challenges or, structural challenges or architectural challenges. I think most of the challenges we have as human beings lie in our own perspective of how we think of life. And us, just being very competitive. I think competition is a big part of that challenge, because when you have this mindset of a competitive mindset, what happens is whatever you create is being created in a silo. And then when we start creating these different silos, what happens is, there is no interoperability between these silos. So it becomes very difficult to have like a synergistic system, like with maximized interoperability, like in a city, to understand exactly what is happening where and how to manage that system. Like Dan says, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we have that lack. Again, the silos, I think, are the main challenge, and then breaking those silos and bringing them together again, because we create solutions, and then those solutions turn into businesses, and those businesses have certain business models, and those business models are usually not incentivizing the developers to share knowledge. They're all in silos because I'm going to want to hold on to what I'm creating here, right? So again, the challenge is us, it's not outside of us, it's our perspective. And I think that is something that's getting resolved, finally in the 21st century. And with all these challenges that we have ahead of us, climate change, socioeconomic, geopolitical, all these different challenges, we're finally waking up and understanding that unless we change that mindset and unless we come to collaborate with one another, all this, we're going to be wiped off the planet. So.
It's so true. Oh my gosh. Okay, so you've talked before about the 4 major pillars of these sustainable smart cities. Maybe you could describe that for our audience.
Absolutely. So again, inclusive, sustainable, smart cities. So first of all, before that, the reason why we chose that, kind of the phrase inclusive, sustainable, smart cities is because we believe that if you think about cities in today's world, right now, talk about, San Francisco or LA or Dubai or Abidjan in Africa, or any city. When you zoom out, what you see is not an ecosystem that we are thriving in. These are big marketplaces. So the way we design a city is like, designing a gigantic marketplace, which is very exclusive, which is very unsustainable and super fragmented. So they are exclusive, unsustainable, or extractive, fragmented marketplaces. That's what it is. What's the flip side of that? An exclusive, unsustainable, dumb marketplaces, an inclusive, sustainable, smart city. So just kind of the mirror of that. So the 4 major pillars of inclusive, sustainable, smart cities are environmental sustainability, social inclusion and community resilience, intelligent and participatory governance, and inclusive economic development. These are the four major pillars.
Okay.
And then each have a set of indicators. They each have 3 different indicators, that total of 12 different indicators that basically makes it much easier for cities to track their progress and, really measure their outcome and their output. And the main blueprint is the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And for those who don't know, like this is like, if you can see this wheel with 17 different colors, that's what it represents. So very quickly, for those who don't know about the UN SDGs, you have all the way from no poverty and zero hunger to good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, water and sanitation, clean and affordable energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation, and infrastructure. We have reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, and finally, partnerships for goals. So these are the 17 UN Sustainable Development
Isn't the
Goals.
goal for that to reach those by 2030? The year
That's correct.
2030?
Yes. So the
That's not a big
alternative.
window of time.
So the alternative name for them is the 2030 Agenda, and that's why this decade is called the Decade of Action, so that collectively we come together and try to achieve these goals. And usually when the goals are not achieved, they just change the name and change the deadline. So the UN SDGs are kind of the child of millennial goals, which were supposed to be achieved by 2015. They didn't. Now we have the SDGs by 2030. But the very unique thing about this decade of action, that what makes us kind of hopeful to achieve these goals to a certain extent, is the power of technology we have today. I mean, just think of AI. Just AI on its own, can really, like, I call AI kind of like, when I think of AI, I think of it as a time machine that can really accelerate our progress to infinity. So whatever, like, because with the amount of data that AI can now process and learn from and, automate things, whatever that would take us, a year to do now can be done in an hour.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of figuring out how to connect those dots together. And I think that's where really the power of, tools such as the spatial web comes to the picture, that can help us now, again, have a really comprehensive sense of what is happening, right? So
Right.
the digital twin technology and everything that can help us, again, measure things and connect dots, and then use tools such as AI to automate the process and really accelerate, like that's really the term. Like, so like every time I talk about what we are doing, I'm saying that yes, we are out of Silicon Valley and we use a lot of technologies, but the center of our attention is not technology. We don't develop technology for the sake of technology. Technology is just like a comprehensive toolkit that can help us accelerate our progress, to improve quality of life, to really protect the environment. So those are really the center of our attention. The rest of it is just, what do we have in the 21st century? What tool do we have in our toolkit that we didn't have before, and how to leverage that?
Okay, interesting. So you mentioned the spatial web. Tell me, I know Versus AI is one of your strategic partners in achieving the goals that you have set for these inclusive, sustainable, smart cities. So how exactly are you working with Versus? What is their technology bringing to the table for you?
Absolutely. So, in the beginning, I mentioned I had this comparison of a human being and a city, right?
Yeah.
And, so now let's talk a little bit about that and then connect dots in that sense. So, when you just think of yourself for a moment, you have, as a human being, you have a functional architecture, you have a structural architecture, the structural architecture being your body and your anatomy, the functional architecture being your mind.
Yeah.
And the functional architecture, which is your mind, now further divides into a conscious mind and a subconscious mind. The subconscious mind is the major one because that's like more than 90% of who you are, what you do, how you maintain your survival, is the work of your subconscious mind. So as you and I are having this conversation, our subconscious mind is still digesting the breakfast we ate a few hours ago. Your hair is growing as we are having this conversation. Your cells are dividing as we are having this conversation. Your heart is beating 70 times or more or less than a minute as we are having this conversation. Without thinking about it, your breath is maintained, so you're breathing, and a lot of things are happening in that city, right? So like you have no idea what else is happening. Like every single cell is producing certain proteins or hormones, and everything that's happening in your brain. So again, trillions of little factories are in operation as we are having this conversation without you and I even realizing or knowing about it. That is what I'm saying, like more than 90% of this whole system is controlled by a system that is completely subconscious and out of our, control, basically.
Wow.
Then
Yeah.
remains just a little bit of it, which is the conscious mind, which is now you and I having this intellectual conversation and thinking and, maybe, creating art or, like all those extra stuff that we do with our conscious mind.
Yeah.
So we have this incredible system in our body that automates our survival, basically, right?
Right.
Without you and I ever even think about it or even know that it exists from the moment we are born to the moment we die. Now, when we talk about a city, which is basically a place where, you think of a city and, again, when we look at the urbanization rate of how, like, by 2050, almost 7 out of 10 billion people will be living in cities. And then beyond that, there's a point that all of us will be living in cities. So cities are kind of the epicenter for human habitation or human habitat, right? So if that's the place where we live, and if we are making the comparison between a human being and a city, what's lacking is, again, that functional architecture. So if you have the structural architecture, our highways, our roads, our hospitals, our buildings, everything, we have siloed functional architectures around. Like this system operates on its own, this hospital here operates on its own, that highway operates on its own. And, with smart city, technology, we're trying to kind of connect these different systems together and make them automated. But again, what's lacking is the kind of the subconscious mind for the city, which is going to automate survival for us, So if our subconscious mind is internally automating our survival, but externally we still worry about ourselves. Where do I get the food? Where do I get my energy? Where do I get this? Where do I get that? When that comes to the picture, when that becomes a challenge, what happens is now our technology can fill that gap. So when you think about it, again, this is the very first time in human history that we can have these conversations because we finally have all those fragmented pieces. We have the AI, we have IoT, we have blockchain, we have robotics, we have 3D printers, we have, the whole industry 4.0, everything, right? So at this point, what we need in order to create that subconscious mind to automate survival, which is, again, we talked about the Sustainable Development Goals, no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, education for everyone, water and sanitation. These are the things that we shouldn't be worried about. our technology needs to figure it out, when our kind of the supply chain is connected, when we connect supply and demand, and then we have AI to like, look at this is how many people we have, and that's how much food they need every day. Now, let's look at, agriculture technology. Let's look at, smart contracts. Let's look at this. Let's look at drones. Let's look at like all these technologies that can come together to figure out a way to automate the process of food production for as many people as we want, and then deliver that to their, door. So at that point, we don't need to worry about food anymore, because that system is automated. The subconscious is taking care of that. Or same story goes with our energy production, same story goes with water, same story goes with everything that we need for education, for healthcare. Everything we need in order to survive must be automated so that we can start focusing on, intellectual stuff, art, humanitarian work, all these things that actually matter, right?
Yeah.
So,
no, I was just going to say, I love this because, that I see that all of this technology is literally ushering in this time period of abundance. But you're right. We need to have these things, underlying foundational things that are facilitating the disbursement of all of that abundance, so that it's not something that we're thinking about or worrying about. It's just taking care of the people. It's taking care of, our of humanity and our lives and the planet, and
exactly. And now people are talking, like, asking, so what's going to happen if AI is going to do all of that? What's going to happen to our jobs? I'm like, why do you need that job for? You need
right.
paid so you can go get food, right? So if that process is automated, just like, the good example of it is in certain places, the internet itself is part of the future, so you have unlimited access to internet because you live in that city, right? So it's part of like an option that you have access to. Now, the rest of these things could be the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So like the main challenge, the reason why we haven't been able to do that is because there is no standardized protocol that can make all these different siloed systems work synergistically. There is no actual infrastructure that can help us maximize interoperability between these different siloed systems to have a holistic understanding of what's happening and then managing it, right? So when I met with Dan and when I learned about the spatial web, I was like, there you go, that's exactly what's been missing. So again, analogy of a human being, I remember it was the first or second conversation we had with Dan. I told him, what you have done is, again, the analogy of having more than 30 trillion cells communicating. We always talk about the cells. We never talk about the extracellular matrix and connective tissue that connects them all together. You are creating the extracellular matrix for everything else. So that's what the spatial web is to me. So when, again, he started explaining how, one of the systems that does have this level of interoperability that we're talking about is the World Wide Web, because we have those protocols that, kind of help, like, with the HTTP protocol, we have all the documents kind of connected together so that we can all access them, right? So the way he explained how we have in the internet, we have there are 4 different layers that need to upgrade so that we can have a next generation of the concept. We have the protocol layer, we have the data layer, we have the logic layer, we have the interface layer, and how, the latest version of it is like using HTTPS for mobile as a protocol, and then, cloud for our data, and apps for our logic, and kind of finally touch screen for the interface layer, and how all these 4 layers are now upgrading. So we don't have touch screen anymore. We're going to have AR, VR, mixed reality technology as the interface. We're not going to have apps as the logic layer. We're going to have AI. We just talk to AI. We're not going to have cloud as a database, now we have distributed ledgers and blockchain. And finally, the last piece that had to come to, really evolve our web from a web of documents to a web of spaces was the hyperspace transaction protocol, which now, instead of connecting documents together to have a web of documents, basically connects everything to have a web of, connects this digital twin of spaces together to have a web of spaces, or the spatial web. So that was, like, I think the most incredible gift that we could receive in order to, really start thinking about now if that is the infrastructure, if we have an infrastructure that can now support interoperability between everything, and combining that with other HSML and next generation of AI, that is kind of the foundation that gives us the possibility to now start, building spaces that are more intelligent, more inclusive, more sustainable, and are all connected.
Yeah. So it's interesting because, we've talked before about this kind of multi-dimensional digital twin architecture, and, how it's not just going to be tracking all of the movements within a city, but also the social data, the environmental data, the economic data, and, what that does for kind of syncing the human states with the environmental states, with the external states. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and how you envision all of this working together. I know you have other strategic partners that are coming together as this just giant global effort to make this happen. So I love it. I'm fascinated by it.
Thank you. So again, going back to the human being example, because it's like very tangible. When you talk about yourself, you're like, it makes a lot of sense now. Why don't we just apply that, certain, like, again, biomimicry, apply that to other systems. So there was a point that we had no tool to measure what's happening. We couldn't even measure our own temperature. Like, if you think about it, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, we had no idea. We had just our feeling.
Palm to the forehead. You're warm.
That means, right? So we couldn't draw correlations.
Right.
In today's world, we have all these devices, Fitbit and Apple Watch, and all these devices that are capturing certain biosignals from our skin, from our heart, from, the temperature, everything that's happening within us.
Yeah.
Psychophysiologic data. That's part of, our biometric identity, basically, right? Yeah. So we have these tools to finally measure our blood pressure, our heart rate, our temperature, our, many things that can be measured. And on the other hand, we have systems that are now tracking our eye movements and tracking our, emotions, and tracking our facial recognition devices that can track our, other aspects that basically show mostly are focused on our psychology, not just physiology, right? So the more sensors we invent to measure what's happening inside and outside of us, the better understanding, the better holistic understanding of ourselves we have, right?
Right.
And that is the only way, if we can finally get to a point where we can have a very comprehensive digital twin of a human being, meaning your heart rate goes up, and the digital twin, the heart rate goes up, So everything, every little change that's happening within your environment has a digital replica that is kind of, manifesting that or mimicking that. That's, that gives you a lot of power, because now you can program yourself for a certain mental state or for a certain physical state. So you become kind of a programmable being, right? So if you feel depressed, you don't need to take a pill to chemically, hack your brain to feel good, even though it's depressed, right? What you can do is you have like drawn correlations already, so you feel a little sad. You know what music or what temperature or what friend or what food can actually change your mental state, change your emotional state, change your physical state. So you get to kind of program yourself for, what you want to be or what you want to experience. So it makes it a lot easier for you to be in control of who you are or what your goals are. Same thing for our cities. So if now we have this, billions of IoT devices coming online and, all the sensors and satellite data, city data, and, all this data that's been captured, when we put this data together with the right framework, what happens is we get to create, again, a very comprehensive digital twin of that whole ecosystem. And now some data are related to the functional structure, again, highway data, parking data, hospitals, this and that, pollution, temperature, all the things that basically are part of the city. Yeah. Some data are related to the environment, environmental data. Some data are related to social data. So that, again, one of the main reasons that I really love this, SDG framework is because we have social dimensions, we have environmental dimensions, we have economic dimensions. Yeah. So it's not just, today's world, people are just talking about climate change and carbon footprint. That's the only thing you hear, but there are 10,000 other things. They call it, it's funny, they call it carbon tunnel syndrome. The only thing that is carbon footprint and how to navigate that. But there are a lot of other factors. So when you have a system to measure the level of poverty, the level of hunger, literacy and education, healthcare, all the way to climate action, all the way to, quality jobs or decent jobs or energy, everything, right? So if you have a system that can give you those measurements of where you are, where is your poverty rate, where is your hunger rate, where is your, what's the state of the environment, then is when you can have a comprehensive understanding of your society and the ecosystem that you have created. And when you have that measurement, it makes it much easier for you to now again manage it, right? Especially with the help of AI. And we talk about the programmability aspect of it, which is very fundamental in our work. That's part of this global standard that we are in a process of creating, is introducing programmable cities. Because when you have that digital replica and you have the AI kind of taking care of, the data processing and learning and all of that, then instead of changing your city or trying to change the state of your society, you just program it, right? So you program the city so it lowers the carbon footprint. And then, the system knows, like, that's the factory that is
where the issues are coming from. Yeah,
exactly. And then it manages. So just you slow down, you speed up, you do this, and it's all happening autonomously. And we don't need to think about it. Or if there's a day where there's a wildfire and you see, like, the air quality is not good, you start taking care of other aspects to balance that out. These are just few examples of what we can do to basically start thinking about programming our cities and having programmable ecosystems.
Right. Now, this kind of leads into the idea of the improvements that it can make for policy making. And, we've talked about that before. So, that's really fascinating to me. So how do you use this data that you receive from this infrastructure to improve the way that, government works and policies are made for the benefit of people versus other entities?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the major indicators that we have. We call it data-driven decision making, basically. So again, these are the things that these are the tools that we have for the very first time in our history. So it's
Right.
exciting. So maybe all of us should be very excited. I mean, a lot of people are have like this pessimistic perspectives about the future, but they don't see what we have today that we've never had before, right? So originally, policy making was the job of people who were, wiser or smarter or had more experience, or, those were like, if you're smarter, if you're wiser, you know how to make policies that are good for everyone. And we still kind of have that. We have, governments, a few people making decisions and thinking that that's the right policy for everyone, which works and doesn't work depending on where you are in the world. And who's behind, what are their agendas behind this policy makings.
Right.
We finally have, again, this big data and AI and basically tools that can help us really have a better sense of pattern recognition and have a better way of drawing correlations, right? So if I do X and Y happens, then, and Y is not something I want, then I need to change the X or tweak it or,
Right.
kind of improve it a little bit. So that's what we call data-driven decision making. So not us, a lot of it's not the term that we feel it, but it's being referred to as data-driven decision making. So that it's kind of, I think, it's like one of the conversations we actually had at United Nations General Assembly science session last year, and we're going to have the same conversation this year again in September, which is how do we bridge the gap between basically policy making and decision making. And when we talk about data-driven decision making, we're really talking about science, because that's what science is.
Mm-hmm.
When you have data, when you look at data, and based on that data you start making decisions or drawing correlations, is when you are basically having a scientific approach. So if we can make our policy making or data decision making process more scientific, meaning instead of only relying on people's opinions, we rely on actual data.
Yeah.
That's a big change. That's like one of the most fundamental tools that we can use to really start rethinking about policies and a lot of the decisions.
So let me ask you then, because you just recently got back from a trip to Africa, and you were taking a lot of these ideas and what Symphony is doing over there. What was the purpose of that trip? Can you tell us a little bit about kind of what the goal is there?
Sure. So, so at Symphony, what we have done is we have, to give you just a little bit of history. So we have created a blueprint. And again, I'm talking about this 12 different indicators that come together and basically make it easier for cities, countries, regions to track their progress towards achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so that's like creating a blueprint is part of it. Then we have created a global task force, which is, we have basically identified some of the most incredible minds on the planet. So people like Dan Mapes, people who are basically either technologists or scientists or policy experts or city officials or architects or investors or even artists, all coming together to have a very multidisciplinary task force with a multidimensional perspective to not only design this blueprint, but also implement them and maintain them. So one of the guys we work with, he's an ex-Disney Imagineer. So he's been part of all the way from, conceptualizing to implementing to maintaining these theme parks, Disney theme parks around the world. So he knows exactly how to build a city from the ground up. Or we
Interesting.
So we have people who are behind, next generation of computers or next generation of web, or all this really strong and amazing toolkits, tools that are coming together for two parallel purposes. One is to transforming existing cities. So an existing city, we create a digital twin, bring all these different tools, and kind of transform that existing city into an inclusive, sustainable, smart city, which is part of that standardization process and certification and all of that. Another is to building new cities from the ground up with a fresh perspective, which is very much needed. Because again, like we said, by 2050, the number of people who live in urban areas is going to almost double up. And if you think about it, we have almost 4 billion people living in urban areas today, and we already don't have enough infrastructure to support them, for housing, for education, for healthcare, for food. We are already in trouble. Now imagine that number doubling up by 2050, having almost 7 billion people living in cities, and having almost 1.2 billion climate refugees. So people who are displaced because of climate change. Imagine all those who live in shorelines, and now they need to have a new place. So in the next few decades, it's going to be very challenging in terms of infrastructure to support the needs of all these people. So we need the transformation of existing cities, because cities have major carbon footprints and a lot of different problems.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we need new cities to, basically house all these new people who are rushing towards the urban areas. And most of this transition is actually happening in Africa and Asia. So Africa is a continent that has contributed to the least to climate change, but it's going to pay the most price, right? So, well, because again, if you measure their carbon footprint and compare that to the US or China, you'll see they haven't contributed a lot. But again, because of lack of infrastructure and lack of self-sufficiency, or a lot of the things that need to be in place, they're going to be really, and again, it's a huge continent, huge population. And so it's going to be very challenging for them to face this upcoming, not just climate, but these crises are going to overlap. So it's going to be climate, when you have huge number of people displaced, not having a place to live. Little by little, that turns into a geopolitical issue, and then the geopolitical issue turns into a socioeconomic issue, and the socioeconomic issues. And so it's just a really complex situation that's very difficult to navigate, not just in Africa, but everywhere in the world. Right. So that's why we think prioritizing Africa and Latin America and places where there is a lack of infrastructure is very important, not just because they need it, but also because it's easier for us. Why is it easier for us? Because when you go to places where there's lack of infrastructure, you can kind of bypass the physical infrastructure and jump into digital infrastructure. So, to give you an example, if you let's talk about education for a sec. So in terms of education in today's world, when you think of infrastructure for education, you need to think of building a school and, bringing teachers and, all those physical things, elements, and transportation and roads. All those physical elements need to come together to have an infrastructure for education system. Yeah. But very parallel to this, we have these technologies, we have AR, VR, we have the metaverse, we have, all these things that are making this completely transforming the way education works.
Mhm.
If you are in a country or if you are in a region where there's a very strong physical infrastructure for education and a lot of people are making money out of it or depend on it, it's very difficult for you to make a transition from physical to digital because you first have to, fight the existing infrastructure
Right.
to
Overcome the politics.
exactly, which is very difficult. And that's
Yeah.
where a lot of startups fail. They have great products, they're disrupting many industries, but that's exactly, the reason why they don't succeed because, a lot of the times it's very difficult to change the existing, right? But when you go to places that there's already a lack of infrastructure, so they're already looking for a solution, it's very easy for them to be convinced to instead of, wasting all of that money or resources to not build physical, we just directly bypass the physical and directly jump to digital.
Yeah.
Right. So instead of building schools, we build a platform with codes, with computer codes. And instead of making all of that money building roads to make it easy for people to go to the schools, we buy VR headsets, right? So it makes it a lot easier. That's just one example that can be applied for energy, transitioning to clean and affordable energy, telemedicine, pretty much everything. So it's a win-win situation where these countries need solutions, and kind of like I always say, one of the main missions we have at Symphony is bridging the digital divide, closing the digital divide, which is a big problem because if you think about it, some countries are becoming really, really, really advanced, especially with this wave of AI, really, really advanced. And some countries who don't have these technologies are really, in a few years, if they don't catch up, they're going to look like Stone Age compared to these countries. So this divide, this gap is becoming more and more, wider and wider. And the wider it becomes, it becomes more difficult to want to bridge it, right? But this is the right time. If we think that if we can create those, multilateral collaboration and partnerships with those governments, we can help them close the digital divide and, also start thinking about building their own infrastructures. And so that was kind of the answer to why Africa was a long answer to your question.
No, I love that though. And it's so important because I think that's something that a lot of people really they're aware of, this digital divide, but the solutions or any kind of a solution, anything that's viable always seems like way out of reach, way out of touch, because it's already such a massive divide. And there's so many political issues and different things that seem insurmountable. So I love hearing everything that you're talking about, because you actually are coming up with ways to make this, to fold everybody into the same path moving forward, for humanity. And that gives me a lot of hope. That's really awesome. I love that. So is there anything else that you feel would be important for, the viewers to understand about Symphony, what you're doing? Is there anything we haven't discussed yet?
I think we pretty much discussed all the important topics, even though it's, for each of these pillars or indicators, I could talk for hours because again, there's not a single topic or industry that we're not touching. It's again, all the way from food supply chain to education, to energy, to healthcare, to climate, to everything. So there's a lot that we can talk about, but I think the most important message I personally have for anyone is, again, technology, these blueprints, these agendas, these are all secondary. The most important thing is our individual perspectives. So if we are seeking a new reality, because, we're all talking about this different people, different groups have different agendas for the future. But if most of us human beings want to live in more inclusive, more sustainable, more advanced ecosystems and have a better quality of life. And that's not something that is, given. It's not something that just comes in a silver platter. It's something that each and every single one of us need to work towards. It's a collective mission. It's not something that one person or one group or one technology or one government can do. It's a collective mission that requires every single one of us, regardless of our education, regardless of our background, regardless of where we live. It's a mentality, it's a perspective that needs to change. And again, this perspective really comes from the main part of this new perspective is to think of ourselves as a collective system. Because, like one thing that I personally really love thinking about all the time is our identity and, the way we define ourselves. So when you say I, what is it that you're referring to? And usually I think we have a very distorted sense of identity, since when we are born, we are just programmed with this, idea that you are born now, you need to have a name, a family name, a nationality, a religion, a language, these are your family, those are your friends, those are the strangers. This is just a very distorted way of thinking about yourself and others. So an alternative way is to think of yourself as an extension of everyone else. So those are not your parents, you're not their kids, you're just an extension of those humans, and they are an extension of someone else. So there was a point that there was only 2 of us, and we recreated ourselves over and over again. Now we have 7 billion of us. And just like we have 30 trillion cells coming together to create this one unit, when we come together, we create a greater unit, and that is our collective intelligence. So the main silos that need to be broken down are not between AI and blockchain and AR and VR, are between ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
So when we from that perspective, anyone I know who has really thought about this perspective is not doing something about it. I'm one of them, when I understand the kind of really the oneness, not just from a physiological, from a psychological or from a philosophical perspective, but from a really scientific perspective, that when we talk about our genome, 90% of more of our DNAs are identical. When we talk about our subconscious mind and how more than 90% of what we are is the subconscious, our subconscious are almost identical. So instead of focusing on the differences, and which are only in our stories, you are you and I am, you have your name, I have my name. Instead of focusing on the differences in our stories, let's focus on what is common between us. And we can spend a lifetime discovering the commonalities between every single human being. So that's the difficult thing to change. Technology development and making these systems interoperable is not a big challenge. You just need a few years of research and development, and you get there. But even if you have that, but you're still operating from this state of mind that this is me and I'm in competition with everyone else and I'm here to just take care of myself, that technology is not going to help you.
Right. It's a doomed mindset.
Exactly.
You'll never get there alone.
This is the challenge. The challenge is not the fix is not something external. I always say, in the beginning, we said we have this sustainable development goal agenda. By year 2030, we have 7 years to get there. Every time I talk about it, I'm saying we don't need 7 years. We don't need 10 years. We don't need 100 years. It could happen in 5 minutes if all of us would come together and decide that from now on, if you come to me and you are hungry and I have extra food, I give the goddamn food to you because I'm feeding myself, I'm not feeding a stranger. Then in 5 minutes, we would have zero hunger,
Oh, yeah, I love that.
If you're a teacher and I come to you and I say, I don't have money, but I need to learn this, and you have extra time to teach me that, in 5 minutes, we have quality education for everyone. If you're a doctor and I come to you and I tell you, my kid is dying, but I don't have money to pay for his treatment, and you have extra time and you treat my kid, guess what? We have good health and well-being in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And the other way around, if you don't start changing this perspective and this attitude, even 1,000,000 years is not enough. Even 1,000,000,000 years is not enough. So it's all about us.
Yeah. That's so powerful. And that's such a powerful message. And, really it comes down to a message of love, love for each other and, wow. So Arsalan, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing what you're doing. It's so important. How can people learn more? How can they get involved? Is there a way for them to get involved with what Symphony is doing? How can they make an impact in their local communities to really push forth, your efforts? Is there a way? Maybe.
Absolutely. So our website is not public yet because of several reasons. One of them is like we're looking for a very special occasion to launch it, and that's around the corner. But again, we are in conversations with different governments, with different groups around the world, and our community is already a big community. We have more than 50 global thought leaders, and our extended networks, we have, I think, up to 1,000 people that are, just versus like up to 100 people. We have Planet Positive 2030, which is an initiative by IEEE Standard Association. We have up to a few hundred global experts. We have Connected, which is one of the largest sustainable development goal networks. We have so many different, so like these 50 people, each are like a community builder. So imagine when all of our communities come together, it's like an army of people ready to do this, right? So yeah. It's becoming easier and easier to find us because again, you'll know someone who knows someone who's part of this network, right? Yeah. So as the network is growing, I'm sure it becomes more and more accessible for people to learn more about it. And then I'm personally accessible, especially on LinkedIn and also Twitter. So, and again, just the people that we work with are all very famous people. So it's easy to find them and then through them find us and see what.
Wonderful. And I'll put your links in the show notes for the show so that people can reach out. And again, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's been such a pleasure talking with you about all of this.
Of course, it's been a great pleasure and honor for me as well. And again, I just want to, one more, since the theme of your show is the spatial web, I really want to thank that entire team, Dan Maves, Gabrielle Renee, and their entire team, Dr. Carl Freston, for doing such an amazing work. Again, without that infrastructure, it's easy to dream, but without such infrastructures and such technologies, it becomes really challenging to actually execute. So a big thanks to all of them for their amazing revolutionary work, and very much looking forward to getting the most out of it.
Awesome. Oh, yes. So on that note, I think we'll close out, and thank you everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.